Hi everyone, I'm Augustin Maria. I'm the program manager for the City Climate Finance Gap Fund, which is a trust fund administered by the World Bank, financed by the governments of Germany and Luxembourg. And our mission is to support cities in identifying and developing bankable urban climate investments. And so Stephen was discussing resilience and climate change adaptation, and my presentation is going to focus on low carbon city development and why low carbon city development is critical to achieving global goals in terms of emissions reductions and what cities can do to achieve low carbon urban development. Now, on the why it's critical. Well, first, the climate clock is ticking, right? So the IPCC estimates that the global cumulative emissions since the beginning of the industrial period up to 2019 averaged 2,400 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And with the linear relationship that you can see between these cumulative emissions and the rise in temperature, that means that we have a carbon budget of about 500 billion tons of CO2. That means that we could afford back in 2019 to have 500 billion tons of emissions before reaching the level that takes us to 1.5 degrees. So with this urgency, reducing emissions in cities is particularly important because cities account for around 70% of our global emissions. This includes 40% of emissions that actually take place in cities and another 30% of emissions that correspond to electricity consumed in cities and the energy required to produce the products that are consumed in cities. So with 70% of emissions, reducing the emissions from cities is particularly important. And the good news is that with the technologies that we have today, we know that we are able to reduce more than 90% of those emissions by 2050. And this can be done by acting on the main sectors, which are buildings, transport, waste, and materials. So in terms of buildings, beyond the reduction, the decarbonization of the electricity supply, which is absolutely necessary, cities can do a lot to reduce consumption in buildings by ensuring that existing buildings can be made more energy efficient through retrofitting, but also, and even more important, by ensuring that every new buildings are built following the highest energy efficiency standard. In terms of transport, beyond the investment in public transit, cities can also do a lot in terms of ensuring that the the new neighborhoods are as compact and walkable as possible, coordinating land use and density with public transport, and promoting the electrification of vehicles. In terms of materials, there is a lot that cities can do to encourage material efficiency, the use of low-carbon materials in construction, adaptive reuse of building and infrastructure, promoting compact growth again, and helping the development of green construction supply chains. And finally, in terms of waste, cities must do a lot to minimize the generation of waste, and for the waste that is still generated, improve the collection and the treatment of waste, and then for the waste that goes to the landfill, putting in place systems for landfill gas recovery. So now, what cities can do to act on those different areas. So I'm going to show you a few examples of how the World Bank, with support from the GAP Fund, is supporting cities in developing climate action plans, mainstreaming climate change into municipal investments, developing low-carbon spatial development plans, and then at the sector level, developing strategies to boost energy efficiency in buildings, developing low-carbon solid waste management strategy, and developing e-mobility. So in terms of climate action planning, we've been supporting different cities across the world in carrying out greenhouse gas emissions inventories, developing scenarios to assess the impact of different types of actions in terms of reducing emissions, and finally, identifying and prioritization of the actions that would be the most efficient for your city. We've been doing this, for example, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in 2 cities in Vietnam, and in Fes in Morocco. Now, beyond the development of specific climate action plan, what is important is also to start from the current investments that the cities do on an ongoing basis and really mainstream climate change adaptation and mitigation into those municipal investment programs. And this is something that we've done, for example, in Addis Ababa, where we have supported the development of a climate smart investment prioritization framework, and in Uganda and Tanzania, where the World Bank has been supporting for many years municipal development programs, where we are looking at the menu of investment that the local governments are financing every year, developing a screening tool to look at which of those investments should incorporate climate change adaptation and mitigation, and then developing technical design guidelines to define the standards that those investments should meet to maximize their positive climate impact. So now I showed you about strategic planning, so developing climate action plans, investment, mainstreaming climate change into investment planning. Now cities also need to take climate change into account in their spatial planning. And so this is a type of support that we are also providing to cities, including urban growth diagnostics. So for example, Pristina looked at the impact of its spatial development plan and the potential impact in terms of resource use and greenhouse gas emissions, and then identified an alternative scenario that would be more efficient. The next step is then to develop urban design guidelines to make sure that the new developments are as compact and efficient as possible, and then the identification of area-based investments to enable this compact and sustainable growth. Then moving to sectoral level interventions, we've been supporting different cities in developing energy efficient housing and densification strategies. So this example is from Indonesia, where the work that we have supported included a cost-benefit analysis of a series of measures to increase energy efficiency in housing construction, upgrading, and also housing reconstruction. This led to the development of action plan to integrate energy and resource efficient construction practices into the government housing programs, including the 1 million houses program led by the Indonesian government, and specific recommendations and training for the use of tools available for green building design. So there is the EDGE tool that has been developed by IFC, and also a tool for housing location suitability analysis. Now, on waste management, we've been supporting the development of low carbon solid waste management strategies. So that includes city level diagnostics, a specific greenhouse gas inventory for the waste sector, option studies and greenhouse gas emissions scenario modeling, the identification of specific investments, and then supporting the design of some of those priority investments. So we've done this in the cities of Chennai, Mangalore, and Kolar in India. And lastly, I mentioned that one important area can also be the promotion and the acceleration of the transition to electric mobility. You'll hear about the example from Vietnam, focusing on two-wheelers this afternoon. Another example in Buenos Aires, where we are supporting the city of Buenos Aires in developing different scenarios and assessing those scenarios with different levels of ambitions in terms of accelerating the uptake of electric mobility and then recommendations, both in terms of strengthening the regulatory framework and investing in developing the charging infrastructure. So I hope these examples gave you a sense of what cities can do. And of course, I remain available to discuss how the GAFN can support you. Thank you very much.